And as you were saying, it was also reflecting on how that end with Dean dying in a car crash was moralistic, because it was a way to in fact punish the igniter of the story, and the one that was taking all those characters into breaking the taboos of a very conservative time. And this is exactly what we didn't want to do, because I think we were really all, when I say we, is the family who did the film, that is the actors, and Jose Rivera and myself, who were passionate exactly about the opposite, which was the possibility to trespass frontiers, the possibility to say that we're able to venture into the unknown. What is being offered to us on a day-to-day basis is insufficient. We want to explore something that hasn't been explored yet. We want to make mistakes. We don't know. We have questions, but we don't know the answers. And we want to really find a sense of a future. And this is what we try to bring to the adaptation. And of course, as you know, we had access to the scroll version of the book, and then the father and son relationship, that is the search for the father that is at the core of the adaptation, became very present in our minds, because both Jose Rivera and I have this personal background in which the missing father is particularly resonant, and that's a leitmotif that we opted to pursue very early on. So yes, it's an ode to youth, and I find it's one of the most beautiful narratives about the transition from youth to adulthood, with all the moments of bliss but also of pain that come with it. It's an ode to freedom, but also you have to understand that when you fight for that, you lose something. And also Dean is the example of that. And it's in many ways an ode to literature, because at the heart of this novel you have writers trying to actually have a voice, and that was very moving to us.
Well, this thing about the voice is so interesting, because there's, of course, the knowledge that Kerouac took such a long time to find his voice to write that book, and then the fact that you used the scroll version rather than the 1957 version that most of us can find in bookstores. Without the scroll version, there probably wouldn't have been the direction that you took. The idea in the first sentence that the father's death has made Jack very melancholy and introspective, and needs to get on the road to find out who he truly is and go into the next phase of his life. And in the published version, of course, he rewrote that because his editors at Viking told him he could be sued if it's too much true to life. And this was, of course, a difficulty for Kerouac, because he was inventing a form, at least he thought so, called true life novels. And so instead of saying that he, in the published version, that it was his father's death that precipitated the journeys, it was the breakup of his marriage to his first wife. And I taught that book a lot, and the scroll is I think a better version of On the Road than the published version. That's the first published version. And it really is two different books, and with the same title, of course, and the same plot, and the same characters. And then you can go on, of course, if you're a Kerouac fanatic, and go to the book that he wrote that pleased him about Neal Cassady the most, which wasn't either version of On the Road, but Visions of Cody, which I think you're going to do next, right? Go. Yes. Anyway, we could go on and rap forever, but do you have questions for us? That's, I think, important to ask about the film you saw, or about some aspect of, and can you hear us back there? Yeah, okay. Are there questions? Yeah.
Walter, question for every artist. You finished something. Are you satisfied? Was there something you thought you didn't do, something you wish you could have done different? How do you, Walter, feel about it?
I'm never satisfied with anything that I do, and neither is my wife with me, by the way. this film was obviously a very long process, in a very long process in the making, but also one where I tried to keep a very kind of impressionistic idea of. For those who have seen Central Station, that film came to me in one morning in a very clear format. I wrote several pages with the basic architecture that you find in the film, and I somehow managed to project that story in an inner screen before filming it. Had I done that with Kerouac, I would be betraying the very essence of the novel, which is a jazz-infused, bebop-infused narrative. And it's about living the moment. It's about giving importance to the improvisation, all the possibilities to improvise and redefine life. I mean, these guys are redefining the future every single day, you know? So I try to somehow leave a blank space every single day. I try to learn everything about this group of young men and women. I tried to learn as much as I could about the social, political, cultural context that informed it. And then I tried to scratch all of that and try to find the film every single day. If you look at a Chinese painting from the 18th century, there's something extremely interesting in it. It is in most paintings, most of those paintings, a part of the frame is always in the mist. So that the spectator is invited to complete that image. You see, perhaps even the painter doesn't know what's in there, but you have the idea that in that mist you can find something in the moment. I try to keep that here, in a way, you know. So I can't truly judge the finished film against what I had projected, because I tried not to project it, you see, in order to make justice to it. Having said that, I wish I had had 4 more weeks to shoot.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
How the creative process with the actresses, Fernanda Montenegro and Central Station, absolutely brilliant. Sandra Corvelloni, Winter Fosse, which is fantastic, from an award. And how do these actors work with you? How do you work with them? How do you get?
Those were very different processes, because you're mentioning 3 films, Central Station, then the film I did in Brazil as I was doing the research for this, and at a moment where I thought that the film would never become a reality, I shot the film with basically first-time actors in Brazil, and Sandra Corvelloni was part of that process. And here, completely different situation with young actors that were maturing as we were actually shooting the film. What I try to do is to install a process where first we work as if we are in the theater, working with the text. The text is a basis, but for us to expand on. It's never a crystallized final, it's never in its crystallized final form. And we always try to rehearse up to the point where I have the impression that we're getting too close to a point of an apex, if you want to. And you should never trespass that moment, because if you do during the rehearsal process, what happens is that when you're shooting the film, you're going to always be thinking, oh, it was better during the rehearsal. So you have to leave the margin for something truly unique to happen during the shoot itself. Now, in this film, what I was trying to do is keep it as alive every single day as possible. So we had the text written by Jose, which was, it had been very elaborated. We did 30 versions of the screenplay, and thanks to the documentary, we also interviewed so many people that gave input that ended up in the dialogues. But in order to keep every single take fresh, was eliminating a sentence from one take to the other, if you want to. Like always creating something new, and trying to keep it as fresh as possible, as Kerouac did. You know, trying to be faithful to the essence of the book. I'll give you 2 examples of how we did that here as well, and in terms of the improvisation. When Viggo Mortensen arrived in New Orleans, he was so informed about the character, which is inspired by William Burroughs, that not only did he bring clothes and hat and the guns and also 2 typing machines if one broke, but he also had made an extensive research about what Burroughs was reading at that time, and he happened to be reading Céline and revisiting Céline works, including Voyage au bout de la nuit, which I think is A Journey to the End of the Night, right? And he had compared the original text, because he speaks very good French, with the translation, and realized that the translation betrayed the text. Therefore, the improvisation that you have in the film about that. You were mentioning it the other day.
I was mentioning it because, of course, Kerouac would have read Céline in the original French. When I went to his home in Hyannis and worked with him on his bibliography in 1967, 68, he showed me all his books, and they were really, really read thoroughly. And of course, the Proust was also in French. This was Cassidy's English version of it. And so what I loved about that scene when Viggo had his conversation with Kerouac about the translation was that Kerouac would never have read Céline in English. He just didn't bother. Why would he have to? But it would have been an interesting thing to talk about with Burroughs. That would have been the kind of thing they actually did talk about. Although we don't have any record of that particular conversation, it was a brilliant improvisation because it made you understand that these were guys who really did read and then talked about the books and then were influenced by the books, of course. So that was very important in that segment.
Gary Snyder, one of the most extraordinary beat poets, used to say that this was a generation that would drive. They were part of the generation that would drive 1,000 miles for a good conversation. So it's not that they are going to the Grand Canyon to see that; they are going to visit Bowley or Burroughs to talk about something. So you see, to improvise, to keep it alive every single moment, was so important. Another example. I got and in order to tell about that, I have to say. I said that the other day that I have to confess that I belong to a very specific religion, and that religion states that there's no independent film without Steve Buscemi. and Steve Buscemi, among other things, helped me to cast the great actor who is also the guy who sings that song a cappella in the car. So he had been in one of his films. And that actor was giving, his name is Jake LaBosse, and Jake was doing a small pocket show 2 days prior to the shoot of his scenes. He saw the pocket show, and that song, with a completely different quality, was so resonant because it reminded me immediately of what was happening with, to Mary Lou. And then I got to him and said, could you prepare silently a version of this? Because it is so much in line with what that character is going on. And he said, I think I can do that. And so, of course, a very small number of members of the crew knew what was going to happen, and he knew, but I didn't tell the other actors what was going to happen. And it just starts. The camera is there, and you capture it as it is happening. And you see there's such sensitivity and intelligence in Kristen Stewart's reaction at that point, because she understands little by little that this has to do with her. It's one take, but she gets that, and you have to trust that the actor can actually improvise in the logic, that the actor can improvise in the logic of his character. But for that, we worked for 4 months as if we were a theater group, developing every single scene. And then once you know every single scene, you have to forget all of them and try to recreate them. And this is how I worked, most of in most films. The only exception is when you work with non-actors. And there, when you work with non-actors, and I've done that a lot in Central Station and in Motorcycle Diaries, you have to somehow transfer what you have written to the actors' to the non-actors' words. They have to take possession of those words. It's a process that takes more time. But we would spend a whole night talking about that. But it's fascinating.
Good question. There was another question down here too. Somebody? Yes?
Would you repeat the question, please? You can't hear me.
All over, everywhere, and I was wondering if there was any part, because I didn't get to see the documentary, during any part of production that was particularly hard for you, or like one particular obstacle that you could talk about that was interesting to overcome.
The question was there any particular part or any obstacle filming on the road that Walter would like to describe?
And that was difficult to overcome.
That was difficult.
The answer is all of them. We had to find the correct weather, the correct landscape, and those things didn't necessarily match. And some actors, because they were working for scale here, they were working for the passion that they had for this, they could come for a specific amount of time. So, for instance, we were at some point in the need to find winter, and we were in August. How do you do that? And I remember that when we were shooting the Motorcycle Diaries, there was a part in Patagonia, in the frontier between Argentina and Chile, in which I opted not to film because I said at the time, this reminds me of New Jersey. And so at some point, the producers, young French producers who were very technology oriented and very vibrant, said, oh, this is so easy. We're going to do a blue screen here, put the car on the stage, and we'll put the snow later. You can do incredible things with this stuff. I said, come from a documentary film background, I'm not ready to do that. But I have a solution that will be cheaper than that. I said, what is it? I said, let's go to Patagonia. I said, you have to be insane. I said, no, let's go to Patagonia. So put up the crew of the Motorcycle Diaries together for 4 days. And off we went to Patagonia. This is why you have Argentina in the credits. So for 4 days, for a third of the price of the blue screen gig, we shot in the middle of the most incredible snowstorm. There was a problem though, the Hudson. We needed a Hudson, right? Well, the only Hudson in South America was 90 miles away from where we shot.
That's amazing.
Can you believe that? That was the most difficult part, I think, by far, logistically.
So that road filled with snow, and that curving road, that when the officer stops him.
Patagonia. You see, you bought it from New Jersey.
You brought the cop from New Jersey?
We brought the cop from here, yeah. Yes.
Wow. I'll have to look at that.
Imagine putting that, but more than that, it is imposing the sensation of being in despair and in the cold or in the rain, to actors. How do you want to do that on the stage? It never really works. And you can truly think that. I mean, it's really great if you're in a science fiction world, but if you're in a narrative that is infused with real life, with real life urgency and immediacy, you cannot do that. You have to try to live under the same circumstances, and this is what took us We drove 60,000 miles to do the film, actually.
I remember you were talking about taking 8,000 miles, was it, where you just did the windshields? And
Yeah,
you
that's when we went actually from New York. We started here in Thompson. We went all the way to California. We were a very small crew. As we finished the film, we said, okay, we don't have enough material in a free-form format, like in a true jazz kind of improvised manner, to edit it. And you see, we didn't have a budget to edit the film as well, I have to say that. So I never saw an image of this film as we were shooting it. The editing started 2 or 3 months after the shoot. So you really had to trust the instincts at that point, you know. And what we did was, for 3 weeks, we really drifted in America's back roads, trying to find that quote-unquote last American frontier that they're in search of. And this was a fascinating process, because a lot of what you find in the film, as the car goes through the rain, or you see the, for instance, even that road that cuts from the typewriter to the road at the very end. All of that was filmed in that second journey. We were 5 people. No, one actor. Garrett Hedlund drove all the way, from here to there, and jazz at full blast. Improvisation all the time. When he's reading the Proust and talking about Sal, do you think that there's a second life? There's a second chance? That's an improv in the car that we did.
When you told me that, I didn't really remember the scene, and so I saw the film after you described that.
He's sitting sideways.
He's sitting sideways, and I thought he was talking to Sal. It was such a grabbing, definitive moment. But if you look at the film again and you look at that moment, he is all by himself. Once you know that he is,
yeah.
Or he's not by himself, but he's not with Sal.
Yeah.
Is not in the car.
Well, but there's my
Shoulder?
my shoulder there.
Okay.
So it's really about living constantly under imaginary circumstances and believing that you're doing that same film, and forgetting actually that you're doing the film. It's being so much in it that you forget that there's a film going on. And then that second unit journey was fantastic. It was just like, we didn't know where we were going to sleep, we didn't know where we were heading, but we found more and more snow that we incorporated and blended with Patagonia. We found rain, we crisscrossed deserts. The car tires blew 8 times. We found the most colorful mechanics in Mississippi and Alabama. I mean, we went all over the place. But the images that we grabbed with a crew of 5 were infinitely better than the images that we had managed to film when we were 70. So that freedom, I mean, for those who study cinema, that freedom is really the essence of the road movie. You have to find that. The best material we shot in the Motorcycle Diaries, I think, was in Cusco and Machu Picchu. We were 12. Only 12, including the actors who were responsible for their clothes, and there was no makeup, there was nothing. You don't need makeup to do those films. You just go,
You must have had somebody in a second car following you?
Yeah, we had a second car in order to do the shots from behind. And we had a van where some of the equipment
a van,
were.
a second car, and
No, we had the van and the Hudson.
Okay, so you did it all with 2 vehicles.
Yeah, 2 vehicles. A student of cinema doing sound was 10 times better than the guy we had with 10,000 kilos of equipment. He had just a small little atom. It's so beautiful to start cinema today, I have to say, because everything has become much more complex if you want to. If you want to make it complicated, you certainly can. But if you want to today to tell stories anew, and do it in a free-form manner, and with a small crew, and find again that spirit that was at the basis of the Italian neorealism, that was at the basis of the French Nouvelle Vague, that was at the basis of the Cinema Novo, you can do it. The technology is conducive to that. Now, we were filming with, we weren't shooting digital because it wouldn't be appropriate for the era. We were shooting film, a very compact camera, Atom camera, and we were actually shooting with no light whatsoever. We were just, tweaking the film as much as we could, and to not to add any light. Even during the night shoots, we were trying to get as little light as we could.
I noticed that when they come and go from New York City over the George Washington Bridge, it's always the same feeling to it. It's blurred in the same way.
And that's the second unit as well. This is what we shot here. And when Dean was actually smoking tea, as they said, in the rooftops, it's the real rooftops of New York.
It looked authentic, like the Ginsberg photographs.
Yes, and it's real tea.
Well, what else? Anybody else have any questions? Yes.
I was wondering if you ever thought about setting a film in modern times, and if you think that the story could still work in today's world, kind of with.
Have you seen? Have you seen
The question was, have you ever thought of shooting a film in modern times? Because the Motorcycle Diaries were 52, and this was.
No, this story in particular.
Sorry?
This story in particular.
This story, the Kerouac story.
Yes.
All right. Have you thought of shooting it in?
No, I did not. But at some point, for those who saw the documentary, at one point, somebody linked to Francis Ford Coppola said, when the Soviet Union was, breaking up and Russia re-emerged, somebody said, let's set this in Russia. So you could have seen On the Road in Russian, but you did not. It was this close, though. I have a question for you. Can I ask? As John was sitting there, asked me a question. I stumbled upon, and I think it was such a great question during the documentary discussion that I would like to bring it back. You say in the text that introduces one of the Penguin versions of the book that this could be seen as a narrative about the end of the road, or the beginning of the end of the road. Could you yes? Can you expand on that? Or the beginning of the end of the American dream? Could you talk a little bit about that?
The thing about Kerouac, of course, was that he was a very patriotic American, and during the Vietnam War, he was a hawk, and he made jokes about it, like they're only fighting to get our jeeps, over in Vietnam. So there was that sense that politically we were on two different, levels, but because we were radical, Sam and I, and we marched and we protested and we left the country and so forth. But the thing about On the Road and the End of the World is that the end of the road is that at the very end of the book, On the Road, when they're in Mexico and they're having this amazing trip. This is all the book, not your film now. Kerouac mentions how surprised he is that the Mexican children are so interested in them and think that everything is so much better in the States, because he said the children didn't understand that the United States had developed the atomic bomb and that this was the end of the road. This was it. That Mexico was literally the end of his road because it was the end of the book, and it was the closest he came to I think the spirituality that was possible in a culture, because the Mexican culture was so much more Catholic and more devout, and the churches were an amazing experience for him. But behind all of that, rushing back and forth and finding their fathers, is in a sense, in 1951, when he wrote the book, that, this could all end tomorrow if there's an atomic war. And every time I read On the Road, I come to that sentence at the end of the Mexican section, and just before they come to Mexico City. And it's sort of alarming, because except for a funny reference to Eisenhower and the beginning of the trip that he has with Cassidy, The first time they're on the road is that 1949 January trip down to see Burroughs, and he goes through Washington, and they see the inaugurational parade with all the military weapons, and there's a little sort of rowboat, and Neil says, "Oh, that must be, the president's, escape," making a joke out of it. But it really is the Cold War, and the atomic bomb is still, only 6 years old, and Russia's developing one, and it's proliferating throughout the world. And so we've sort of forgotten about it, but we're very good as a human race for forgetting things that make us uncomfortable. And so we've done that with the atomic bomb, most of us. And yet Kerouac gives this sort of show away in that sentence at the end of his book. So maybe I was thinking about that. I do not know what I was thinking about. It was so long ago that I wrote that. 20 years and more. Any other questions? Yes.
On the Road is very American novel, and I'm just wondering, you being from another country, being that, what did you look from a different perspective, or a clearer perspective of the American experience?
The question is that On the Road is an American book by an American author, and is being a Brazilian filmmaker helpful in making a film, giving a different perspective on American writing, culture, and literature, as well as the experience that... How do you read the book?
When we were here doing the documentary 5 years ago, one of the persons I interviewed and was most impressed with was Amir Baraka. Amir Baraka told me that for him, this was a book about, this was the story of the blue-collar kids of immigrants to this country who didn't find a place or the possibility to exercise their voice in a very conservative society and collided against it. If you think about the main characters On the Road, they are in between cultures, most of them. Kerouac as a son of French Canadians, Ginsberg, of course, as a son of Eastern European immigrants, Neil Cassidy as a grandson of Irish immigrants. I mean, all of these characters are somehow seeing the culture from within and also from a distance, and they want to pertain to it, and they want to have to add something to it at a time where the culture is not very porous to that. Now, the person who was exactly in this position was not me, it was Jose Rivera, the writer. He's also a son of immigrants to this country. I mean, he got here when he was 6 years old, and he's an American playwright. But he's also somebody who's from Puerto Rico, and so he sees the country, he sees the culture from within and from a distance. I lived here many years. I have two younger brothers who were born in the U.S. I did graduate studies here, but I still have my Brazilian passport. And this is why I did the documentary, in trying to fully understand all, or as much, the cultural, social, political background behind the story, but also the complexities of the human the human characters that were driving this story forward. Because this is at the end what makes it universal. It's the fact that it's such a beautiful rendering of what I said a little bit before, that passage from youth to adulthood. This is what makes it universal. This is what makes Catcher in the Rye universal. And I was trying to respond to that. I had a very direct connection with this book because I read it when I was 18, entering university in Brazil, and don't want to repeat myself because I said that earlier on during the documentary. But there was censorship at the time, and the characters in On the Road were able to redefine a future and we were not. And so this was a very iconic book for me, but for completely different reasons, and for other people who may have read it here, And then I reread the book before doing the Motorcycle Diaries, because I wanted to infuse that film with the immediacy and the urgency that you had in On the Road. I find that the writing is beautiful, really beautiful. I'm still under its influence, if you wanted to. And it's interesting because it's the second time that I do a film where I'm not specifically from that culture, but I try to understand as much as I can before starting. The Motorcycle Diaries was also about that.
It must have been, in a sense, easier with the Motorcycle Diaries because they were able to talk to each other in a way that that Sal and Dean can't talk to each other. I mean, the sadness between them, in the quest for the fathers, the social difficulties they have because they're both so poor. I mean, economically poor. Sal has his mother, and Dean has nobody. And he's just looking for the father in that film. And in the Motorcycle Diaries, we have two young men who have all of their lives ahead of them with brilliant careers and education, families that are solidly in support of them. I mean, if you look at those two films side by side, On the Road and the Motorcycle Diaries, just from the point of view of the couple of young men who are involved as protagonists, the American experience seems so meager compared to those young men. I mean, that opening scene in the Motorcycle Diaries when he's being given a send-off by his family, it's just brilliant. So, and poor Sal, comes home to his mother and she calls him a name because she's so overwhelmed by her need of Sal that when he's gone, she nearly, has nothing to live for. She doesn't make friends. She has no husband anymore. Father died. And her daughter's living far away, and there's no one. She's above a drugstore, for heaven's sakes, in the middle of nowhere. And that's not the middle of nowhere. It's but for her, from where she's
Queens.
Yeah. Anyway, my point is that for me, seeing the film through your eyes, because you directed it, and then comparing it with films like The Motorcycle Diaries or Central Station, where you may think you don't know the society, next to you in Chile as much as you don't know America, but I get the feeling that you do. You know about rivalries that I have no perception of. And yet the social context for the Motorcycle Diaries protagonists, the two men, and compared with the American experience, I think it's a revelatory moment. You can learn so much from films without even traveling to Patagonia, by just seeing the difference in the characters. And Kerouac did go to Columbia, but he dropped out, and I don't think Dean went to any school past probably the 7th grade, and their opportunities were just so shallow compared to what was available for the young men of better families in South America. So that to me was a revelation, seeing the Motorcycle Diaries again recently, and then seeing On the Road. There's the contrast in what the culture had as opportunities for the young men, and I think they knew that. They sensed this.
And yet, the lustful life in On the Road is I think it's even more present than in the Motorcycle Diaries, in the writings, I'm saying. Yeah. The desire to go beyond the conditions that you were describing, and redefining themselves. I mean, which is truly what the book is about. I mean, becoming a writer, having the experiences to do so, living the moment.
Well, I also wanted to say that you can understand the friendship between Ginsberg and Kerouac, the real life friendship I'm talking about, not the one that you're portraying on the screen, because Kerouac does have the outsider status, and he's not comfortable with the traditional American icon of Thomas Wolfe, which he followed in his first novel. So there's no cultural support for Kerouac trying to write something in his own voice, and he's obsessed with the need to do that and to become a great writer like Proust, to capture time, which he and Ginsberg both understand is fleeting. They're mortal. They're going to die. This was another great bond between Kerouac and Ginsberg. So your film helped me understand the passion, the friendship between them as writers, and I thank you for that. That was very, very illuminating to me. And again, because of the isolation they found themselves with. You know, the characters in the Motorcycle Diaries have a totally understandable social context where they're thoroughly at home and they can do anything they want within it. Their futures can be great research scientists or humanitarians or political figures, and that's gone in America. There's this thin kind of vacant in your book. So I don't know if anyone else who follows what I'm saying or cares or agrees even or disagrees passionately, but that's what I took out of seeing those maybe the 3 films you've made about the road.
And we'll have time for one more.
Okay, time for one more question. Anybody?
What a responsibility.
I just wanted to ask about how you ended up selecting these actors. Like, what was the process? Like, was there other work that you'd seen by them that made you want to look into these particular people?
The selection of the actors. How did it happen?
It started very early on, as we were doing the documentary, because that question that you asked was kind of echoing in my mind constantly. Will we ever find the right actor for Dean? He's the igniter of this story. You know, he's the one that brings the knowledge of the streets to these young intellectuals who want to be writers, and they possess the capacity to articulate it, but they haven't lived it. So will we ever find somebody like this? So we started the casting process really early, and at the same time the documentary was, you know, progressing. And one of the very first persons I interviewed was Carolyn Cassidy, and I found her to be so sharp. Annie knows her really well, and to be so sharp and sensitive, razor sharp, that I thought immediately about somebody who had that degree of intelligence and precision, and that was Kirsten Dunst. You know, she's incredibly precise. I mean, you see the scene where she collides against Dean, and they sever. The relationship is broken. There's never more than 1 or 2 takes of her in that scene, because she's so good. She's Is Kristen not liking what it's saying? And she was invited in 2005 to do the film. So early on. And then early 2006, Alejandro Inarritu did Babel, Amores Perros, 21 Grams. Has dinner with me. We meet in Los Angeles, and he was just landing from San Francisco, where he had seen the first cut of Sean Penn's very unique Into the Wild. And he said, you know, I'm so impressed by a young girl who appears in the film, and she's luminous, and the camera loves her, and she's so evocative, and, you know, pay attention to her. And she said, he gave me her name. I had never heard of Kristen Stewart, so I pick up a napkin and I write the name down. When I saw Sean Penn's film, I understood why it had generated that kind of impact in Alejandro, and why he had said, you know, for Mary Lou in On the Road, you should really think about her, because she has that kind of mysterious and wild quality that talked to her. And in meeting her, I was surprised. I didn't say for what the meeting was, and when I mentioned On the Road, she talked for half an hour about it. I mean, she knew it inside out. She had an in-depth understanding of the book. I had read it at 18. She was 17. And more than that, she understood that Mary Lou was decades ahead of her time. You know, that she broke the taboos of the 40s and 50s, but some territories that she ventures in would be taboo still today. And she said, you know, I'm very different from her, but I would love to play her. this is how she entered into film 6 years ago. Garrett Hedlund drove, I had no idea who Garrett was. Drove all the way from Minnesota, northern Minnesota, where he lived in a farm, to Los Angeles. And we were testing in a very small theater. And when he finished reading the scene, which was the one, Camille didn't let me commit suicide, you know. It's an emotional roller coaster that seemed very hard to nail, especially out of the blue. If you just arrived from northern Minnesota, it's probably more difficult. He read it so precisely and so emotionally, and there was such electricity in the air that we were really impressed, but not completely still, you know, sure whether. Then he said, you know, can I read something that I wrote on the way to Los Angeles? And then he wrote about the loneliness of the road, the encounters that he had made, you know, in coffee shops and, you know, along the road. They were so resonant, and they reminded me so much of Neil's letters. It had that beat, that kind of, was infused with the kind of interest for life that you have in Neil's letters. And I said, well, this guy gets it, you know. So he got in early 2007. Then Sam Riley, I saw a film called Control in 2007, and I was very impressed by not only what he did when he was given lines to cut, but especially what he did when he didn't have to say lines. You know, and a writer is somebody who decants what's happening in front of him. You know, he sees the world and he has to make sense of it. And he has to keep it in in his memory. And you have to, if the camera is on him, you have to understand what he's feeling in that specific moment. And I had the impression, well, this guy has that kind of understanding. And we asked him to read with Garrett, 6 blocks away from here. And he nailed it in, you know, take one. And he said, okay, that's the guy. I mean, the whole cast was put together in 2006, 2007. The problem is that it's so difficult to do independent cinema these days that it took 3-4 years to get the financing for this film. And I never thought it would get financed at the end of the day, you know. And yet they were so passionate about this that they kept on calling. I mean, Garrett calling almost every 3 months and saying, I've been offered this film, I don't want to make it. Tell me that On the Road is starting. And said, man, I wish I could say that, but you know, I can't. It's not. So he would do other films, but always, you know, game to go to Northern California, interview John Cassidy, Niels Cassidy's son, and interview him for 6 hours, then riff on the guitar with him. And great moments. And he was faithful to this. And at the end of the day, to do a film as complex as this one, you know, that you know it's going to be so emotionally and physically challenging. You need a family to create a family that is as passionate as you are about the theme. Because that's the only way you're going to get to the end of that journey. Otherwise, it's going to dissolve in the air somehow. We had that in the Motorcycle Diaries, and here it's I owe a lot to the actors who were faithful to this since the beginning, and their lives changed, you know, better than I. You know what succeeded to several of them. You know, they had you know, they had other films that brought them to be in a completely different position. But once we were shooting, they were really interested in portraying those characters and forgetting everything else. You know, no cell phones on set, no nothing. We were there just doing the film.
Once you started filming, how long did it take you?
60, a little bit more than 60 days. Five for the Motorcycle Diaries, we had 5 more weeks to shoot than this. So it was a fairly short. We had only 8 weeks to prep it before starting to shoot. It was a very dense kind of production, complex. You were so great. I wish we could bring this group to other Q&As. You could just travel with us as we go along. Thank you very much.